All right, this is my very first video, so bear with me. This doctor, or professor, I mean, his grandfather was a doctor for, let's just say, what was going on when they were trying to split the atom. I don't want to say the word because who knows if it'll be picked up by the algorithm and flagged. So his doctor was a part of calculating radiation, all this other stuff to see if it was harmful to people. James right here wrote a book called The Atomic Doctors. It was released, I think, in August of 2020. Basically describes about how the doctors knew what was going to go on and how bad things were, but they still kept pushing forward, kind of like a cognitive dissonance. Let's listen to what he has to say.
I saw this box of material and I couldn't believe, what was in it. Turns out that it was material that my dad had kept but hadn't really talked about or shown to anyone else. And in it were my grandfather's papers, photographs, correspondence, artifacts, maps on the Manhattan Project. And this was really the beginning of a deeper exploration into nuclear technology, the dawn of the nuclear age. But as I mentioned, my interest, wasn't just personal, and it wasn't just this unique history, but I had for a long time been interested in understanding the role of technology on society. And here you
see, that's a key role right there. He's trying to study the role of technology on society. He gets further in depth than that, further into the video, but just keep that as a key point.
Of the quintessential 20th century technological innovation, the nuclear bomb. And it was this, in my mind, this fantastic opportunity to explore this and to explore it more deeply, not just kind of in terms of the personal dimension, it being my grandfather, or the unique history of the early nuclear age, but also how does this fit in with a deeper and fuller understanding of the influence of technology on social life.
As Nolan started to go through the materials, he found that his grandfather was put in a very difficult position as a doctor in the Manhattan Project. July 1945 saw the first detonation of an atomic bomb, the Trinity test. Worried about the dangers of radiation to local people, Dr. Nolan warned the Manhattan Project's head, General Groves, of the necessity for an evacuation plan.
See, so as you can see, and as he's going to discuss further, the doctors knew of the danger of the radiation. They informed their higher-up general of what could potentially happen, and listen what the general basically tells the doctors, gaslighting them, as you could say, I guess, trying to make them feel bad for them producing actual good information on what could potentially happen, trying to protect the citizens. But as you can see, it doesn't seem like this general cares about what happens to the citizens. He's more worried about keeping things top secret.
However, according to Dr. Nolan's papers, Groves completely ignored the doctor's warnings.
And he rebukes my grandfather and he says, "What are you, some kind of Hearst propagandist?" And what he means by that is that this is unwelcome information that I don't want to get out. I don't want sensationalized kind of journalistic, accounts of what we're doing, because that would violate the military concerns of secrecy and security. And he didn't want that. He didn't want it. It's top secret. We don't want this to get out. So there was pushback against this warning. So it was very clearly the doctors were concerned. They warned Groves, and he was not happy about this. And in my grandfather's words, he says, in those days, concerns about radiation were entirely secondary.
So as you can see, if they said that concerns about radiation 75 years ago were entirely secondary, what do you think potentially could be going on with what all this crap is happening with convid 1984? What is considered important and what is considered secondary? This is kind of creepy because they're pushing this stuff really, really fast, wanting everybody to get inoculated. How do we know that those are really safe? How do we know that the trials that they actually did were actually legitimate? How do we know there aren't doctors out there currently being silenced or threatened right now?
They were mostly concerned about building the bomb and using it for the purposes of warfare. And so you had a military mindset that was preoccupied with security, secrecy, compartmentalization of tasks, hierarchy of authority, and then you have the scientists who are really about scientific discovery. Can we actually do this? Can we harness the energy of the atom?
So it kind of seems like they put the doctors and the scientists in two different places at once, saying, you are a part of the military. Yes, you are a scientist, but you're a part of the military. So you're forced to keep this secret. It's just kind of interesting, it seems like they're even social engineering the doctors and scientists
in order to make this explosion. And it's a mindset of discovery. And it's intoxicating, right? It's this idea, can we do this? Can we actually do this? And so the scientific push and even the scientific pushback against the doctors was a different mentality than the military one, but it is one that pushed forward, right? And so when the doctors and the two scientists put forth these warnings, the pushback in the lab was also strong.
Immediately.
So as you could see, the scientists, had their cognitive dissonance. They were like, can we actually do this? This is kind of exciting. We've never done this before. We want to do this. But in the other part of their head, I guarantee they were saying to themselves, this is dangerous. Why are we doing this? Why do we keep pushing along? Could it be the social engineers that were having them do that? Not too sure.
After the atomic bombings, Dr. Nolan and other doctors were sent to Hiroshima and Nagasaki to investigate the effects. Their measurements revealed enough fallout and residual radiation to seriously harm the human body. But as Professor Nolan discovered in the transcripts of the Senate hearings, General Groves' testimony ignored the doctor's report.
They talk about the people in the hospitals, and in some cases, a high percentage of them had radiation exposure, radiation effects. Many of them died, and acknowledge that. So in the report, there's all sorts of information about the actual effects of radiation. And they talk about the various forms of radiation sickness. And so when Groves testifies before Congress, he says there is no residual radiation, none.
So did you hear what he just said? Basically, the doctors were saying that this radiation was really significant, that it's harming people and people are dying from it and getting sick. And then the general testifying under oath in Congress is lying to Congress saying, oh, there's nothing really wrong with this. Nobody's dying. Then listen to what he says about how he talks about people died from radiation. That is just sickening.
That he actually emphasized it, none. And he says very, very few people are dying from radiation sickness. And then he said, beyond that, the doctors tell me that it's a very pleasant way to die.
So he's saying that the doctors told him that it's a pleasant way to die. The guy is just blatantly lying under oath to Congress. What else could be potentially being told today that's an actual lie? How do we know that these generals, these doctors aren't manipulated to lie to Congress? This is kind of interesting. If that could happen 75 years ago, just think of what's happening today with convid 1984.
Tells the Senate that it's a pleasant way to die from radiation, which of course we all know is not true. And the doctors never said that, and they didn't see that. It's a very agonizing way to die. And so it really was a kind of a clearly false statement that he was giving to the Senate when he testified. Yeah. It was predetermined. They wanted to find that there was no radiation. They wanted to find that there wasn't ongoing sickness because of.
See, did you hear how he said it was predetermined? So it kind of seems like the government already knew that radiation was dangerous and could be potentially harmful to people. But it was already kind of seemed like they just wanted it pre-planned, that even though they knew all these harmful situations and what was going on with the people after the effects, they were just saying that, no, it's not harmful. It's fine. We still got to keep testing. It's fine. Let's just move along.
Radiation exposure. And in as much as Groves could cite the expertise of these doctors, he was providing cover for himself. He was co-opting them. Yeah. And I would say, in terms of how did the doctors respond to that, they were in a very difficult role. They were both military. And so they have to observe this hierarchy of authority. At least that's, they're in a position of having to do that. And it seems to me that in many ways, even though they tried to offer warnings and they did it repeatedly, once Groves kind of states the official narrative, what can they do? And there wasn't a sense in which they kind of fought back, at least.
See, so as you could see, it kind of seems like the doctors were kind of forced, just to go along with the pre-planned narrative that the government already had issued, saying that this isn't harmful. And like he said, what could they have done? They said that the doctors were part of the military, so they potentially could have gotten in trouble for releasing confidential information. Who knows if they were threatened with their, what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's really interesting what this guy has to say.
There's not a lot of evidence of that.
Against their conscience and will, the doctors were manipulated for the purposes of the secret project. Still.
So how do we know doctors today aren't manipulated? So, it sounds like the doctors were conscious back then, as they're going to say further in this video, but they were complicit with what was going on. How do we know that the doctors today, with this VAXX and the convid 1984 plandemic, as stated by James Bullard, president of the Missouri Federal Reserve, said this is a planned, organized shutdown of the U.S. economy in the second quarter? This is just ridiculous.
Nolan decided to add a subtitle to his book, Conscience and Complicity at the Dawn of the Nuclear Age.
I think in certain ways, the doctors were complicit, right? They allowed themselves to be co-opted. It was a very difficult position to be in, and it happened at Trinity. It happened in terms of Japan. It also happened in the Marshall Islands. There is a certain sense in which the doctors...
So he just admitted that it happened in 3 different places: Trinity, Japan, and the Marshall Islands. So even after they knew the potential harms of radiation, they were still radiating all kinds of people and not even caring. So if governments could do that 75 years ago, what the hell do you think they're doing today?
Basically allowed themselves to be used with resistance, but so it's nuanced, it's complicated. It troubled him, and that he would have these dark moods where he would just sit. And he himself would often, he loved to shore fish in Southern California coast, and would just sit there for hours. And he talked about that. He goes, I like to do this because it gives me an opportunity just to look out at the ocean. And there was a sense in which, he wrestled with it. His nephew said he never came to terms with it in his mind. It was something that he pondered. It was something that troubled him. And I believe it did. I believe it did trouble him, what the role he played.
It seems somehow fateful that this rare material should land in the hands of Professor Nolan. From an early age, James Nolan was an avid student. Since beginning his master's degree in sociology at the University of Virginia, his main interest has been technology's influence on modern society.
See, now this part of the documentary is even better, talking about how technology has an influence on modern society. Basically, he'll be going into depth talking about how if you don't have a smartphone, you can't participate in society. How do we know they're not going to do the same thing with this new convid pass and all this other stuff, saying you cannot participate in society unless you use this certain technology that we have, because it's for necessity. It's for your own good. And as William Pitt said, necessity is the plea for every infringement on human rights. It's the argument of tyrants. It's the creed of slaves.
In class, Nolan uses his research on the Manhattan Project to warn of technology's insidious ability to shape our way of thinking. A lesson with increasing relevance in our technology-saturated age.
If we live in a technological society, we begin to think according to technological values. And that's hard for people to understand or realize, right? So to give you an example, I was in a conversation this summer with someone who was very celebratory of all things technological. And he said, it's wonderful, this thing would be wonderful. It's quick, it's easy, it's cheap. That's what he said. It's quick, it's easy, it's cheap. And most people say, yeah, great, if it's that, then better than something that's cumbersome and expensive and takes a long time. Quick, easy, cheap. Those are the terms he used. And I said, well, think about those terms. Think about those terms that you just used. Would you use those to evaluate or to judge the value of something like a marriage or a friendship? I love that because it's quick, easy, and cheap. Of course not, right? But his expression is reflecting a mindset that's shaped by technique, okay? And I was just...
So that kind of does resonate with what everybody wants nowadays. Everyone wants something that's quick. They want something that's easy. They want something that's cheap. Just look at fast food restaurants, for instance. People want it fast. They want it. They want to be able to have easy access to it, and they want it to be cheap. Same thing kind of with technology nowadays. He's making a very good point here. Let's go along.
I just went to a lecture the other day that was on new developments in biotechnology, and genetic engineering in particular. And CRISPR, do you know that? The kind of gene editing methodology. He was talking about that. And in the talk, and it was actually on the PowerPoint slide that he put up there, he said that the labs prefer this method of gene editing because it's quick, easy, and cheap.
Now, I totally don't agree with gene editing. Because it's kind of a disgrace to people that do have disabilities, saying that, oh, we could get rid of this disability. Isn't that kind of a slap in the face that's saying that people with disabilities aren't relevant in today's society? And it's also, he also makes a good point that the doctors are using CRISPR because they say that it's cheap, easy, and quick. Do we really want doctors messing around with the human race, trying to alter us? I mean, once they do alter us, there's no going back. So... do we really want gene editing? To me, I would say no.
The exact 3 words that this fellow I was talking to earlier. Again, it's a technological mindset. This is more efficient. This is quick. This is easy. This is cheap. And I think in as much as that's how we view the world, you can see how technology is shaping us profoundly.
Nolan sees the Manhattan Project as a reminder of the power of technology over our minds, and the need to remain aware of the technological mindset that pervades our present era.
See, he makes a very good point there. Look what happened with the technology that the doctors were dealing with during the Manhattan Project. Look at the technology that we're having to deal with today. Are we going to be complicit with it? Are we really going to let all of this happen and let them trample our Constitution and our rights that we have? Are we going to go willingly? Just listen.
So what happens there is a great example of what Ellul refers to as technological determinism. So technological determinism is this notion that technology has a force outside of ourselves that compels us forward in ways that we're not even aware of. And so that's why
That's kind of like the social engineers. They get into our mind, pushing these buttons and making us do things that we're not even aware that we're doing, that they're making us do.
Observations of some of the physicists who put themselves back in Los Alamos, in the spring of 1945 and can't understand why they kept going forward. There's a certain sense in which they're recognizing and identifying technological determinism. They're saying, I was determined as though by a force outside of myself, even against my best inclinations. It compelled me forward. I don't even understand why I kept going. As the only way to act with freedom against technological momentum or the technological imperative is to understand it. And so that's what I see myself doing in my technology and modern society class, helping students to understand just.
And I do agree with him there. if we actually understand what's going on with the convid 1984, instead of listening to mainstream media and what they want us to know, we will be well more informed of what is going on. We will know that this 99.97% of survival rate is a higher efficacy than a 94 or 95% with the VA XXX. So people just need to get out there, inform yourselves more, hopefully fight against all of the censorship and shadow banning, because that's what they want, because they don't want the truth out there.
How powerful this technological force is in our lives, such that, people will say, how could you not have a smartphone? How could you go without that? Well, that's expressing a kind of, if you will, slavery. I have no...
See, that's a really good point there. Technology can technically be slavery. How do we know when they don't roll out the central bank digital currencies? What's going to happen with people that are homeless? What are going to happen with people that just get out of jail, that can't afford a cell phone, that are just barely being able to put a roof over their head or put food in their bellies? It's kind of sickening, that they're going to just force us to use this technology. And that's kind of where it's getting to nowadays. If you don't have a cell phone, people look down on you like, whoa, what's wrong with you? You don't have internet at your house? You don't have this? How do you survive? I mean, plenty of people were able to survive without cell phones. Plenty of people were able to survive without computers. I do like technology, don't get me wrong, but I do have a feeling, though, that people are getting too reliant on it. Like, why don't you just upload your pictures to the cloud? Well, what happens if the cloud goes down? I think it's better to have physical documents of stuff, because what if people start trying to burn the Library of Alexandria, for example? What if they start taking stuff off the internet? What if you can't access things on the internet? But if you have it in physical copy, you'll always have it.
Choice. And we look at, I don't know if we talked about that, this new documentary, The Social Dilemma, which is, interviews with the leaders in Silicon Valley. These are the ones who invented and started Facebook and Google and Snapchat and Pinterest and all the rest, right? All these applications that people are engaged with for hours every day. And they themselves say the very same things that the physicists said in Los Alamos. They say, we've created a Frankenstein. We've started something that now even controls us. The lesson is to understand its forces against us. And Alul says, only if you understand it, only then are you in a position to act with freedom against it.
And that's why I say people need to do more research. The more you understand, the better you are in life. Knowledge is power. Learn as much as you can. If someone tells you something, go out there and do research. Don't just take someone's word for it. Always do your own research. And people are getting to the point nowadays where they're so wrapped up in this technology, like he's saying, in Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, where they're too lazy now to even go out and do their own research, because they would rather just have someone entertain them on TikTok or Instagram or watch dumb videos. People are out there not wanting to educate themselves. Please educate yourself.
And so the class is really more about gaining a deeper understanding of technology and society, how it influences us, how it shapes us, how it affects our relationships, our ways of thinking about the world, our ways of thinking about the human person. That's the main focus. And it puts a person in a position of then being able to say, maybe I shouldn't use this. Maybe I should walk away from this. Maybe I should, use this in a more careful way, yeah.
I totally agree with him there. That's why I don't really get on Facebook very much anymore. Why does the whole world need to know what I'm doing? When I was a child, I never used to post anything on Facebook or anything. Who cares what other people are doing? Facebook has kind of gotten us to the point where we're just judging what other people's do. Maybe that could be the potential reason why so many people are depressed nowadays.
Ask Professor Nolan to leave us with some words for navigating these times. He writes, "Understanding the force of technique."
Understanding technique in a Lulian sense refers not just to the actual instruments of technology, but to certain ways of thinking. And I think in order to act with insight and wisdom about our uses of technology, we need to understand both the effects that instruments have, as well as the way in which a technological society shapes our view of the world.
So I would have to agree with the professor there, James L. Nolan Jr. It's kind of interesting, though, that what he was referring to about his grandfather being the doctors for the Trinity tests, and how they were warning the generals that this could potentially harm people, but the generals were more concerned about covering it up over secrecy. So just think about what could be happening today with the doctors and the scientists today. If they could be convinced 75 years ago not to release this information, what do you think could potentially be happening today? Thank you very much. I know this is my very first video. Please bear with me. Hopefully the ones in the future will be better.